Welcome to our NECA Risk Focus Toolbox Talk. Today we are at Northern Beaches trade show hosted by TLE Brookvale. I am Cassie, one of your NECASafe advisors, and I'm here today with Owen Leslie, who is the NECASafe manager.
G'day guys.
And today we will be discussing the hazards surrounding machinery, plant and equipment. I wanted to first start with talking about statistics.
Yep.
So I found it quite startling in 2022. We were looking at around 71% of the 195 fatalities surrounded machinery, plant and equipment. So I just wanted to see how we could better understand the impact of that in the workplace.
Yeah, so it's really important for us to understand the causes behind some of those fatalities that happen with machine, plant and equipment. And the one thing to know is that machinery, plant and equipment is often big, bad, items of machinery that we can easily get struck by, caught in between, crushed by, sucked into. There's generally stored energy in form of hydraulic and electricity that can shock us. We can fall from them. So there's just plenty of different ways that these machines, high-powered machines, can actually cause fatality. So it's important to understand some of the causes of that and the different types of equipment that we're using to be able to understand the risk and prevent it from happening to us.
Sounds like there's quite a lot involved. Could you just start off by giving us a few examples of hazards around machinery, plant and equipment? Yeah,
well, it's a good idea if we talk about some of the equipment that we're going to be covering off today. Machine, plant equipment can be anything from an elevated work platform to an excavator to forklifts to cranes, even things like power tools that we use, angle grinders, power drills, cordless drills, to petrol-powered equipment, concrete cutters, concrete saws, chainsaws, all those type of bits.
So anything that moves?
Pretty much, and even electrical equipment, office equipment, kettles, toasters, and everything in between as well can have hazards associated with machinery, plant equipment hazards.
Yeah, great. And how crucial would training and competencies be surrounding?
Well, yeah, training and competency is going to be really important in regards to plant equipment. So let's start with the more basic plant equipment, power drills or angle grinders. We need to make sure that the operator of the equipment is going to be competent and understands how the operation works, the ins and out details and the danger points in regards to that point. So you can't just sort of hand someone a tool and just expect them to know how to use it. We need to make sure that they understand how they use it by providing supervision to a degree up into the level, making sure they have a clear understanding and competency to use that. As we go into larger machinery, plant and equipment, we may come across a requirement for actual specific competency and licensing as well.
I would suggest then that there would probably be further requirements around refresher training once you've got some particular tickets.
Yeah, exactly. It's always good, if you got certain competencies and training in place, you really need to start looking at managing that through like a training matrix or a training management system. And you want that training management system to be able to tell you what to do and when to do it. So it automatically alerts you to up and coming licensing requirements that may be needed, up and coming licenses or competencies that need to be refreshed and gone through. So a good training matrix is going to be a really important factor for managing risk for machinery, plant equipment.
And having that training and understanding would probably make it a lot easier for them to be able to identify those hazards as well.
Absolutely. I think that's going to be a big part of any learning process is more, how to identify hazards, how to understand the risk assessments and start obtaining the experience and know-how in regards to those items. Yeah, absolutely.
So you said that there was some larger plant and equipment that needed particular tickets. Are there specific requirements around mobile plant and equipment, possibly focusing on some in particular?
Yeah, so there's going to be equipment like, for example, elevator work platforms. You're going to need a high-risk class work license for elevator work platform, boom type platforms that have the ability to work over 11 meters. And so you're going to need a license requirement. But even for any other type of elevator work platform, like a scissor lift, a trailer lift, or a smaller type boom lift, you're still going to need a nationally recognised accredited training to be performed by a registered training organisation to obtain a competency for that. So you may not need a licence, but you still need the actual competency, which is gained through a formal course. Now that goes for excavators, forklifts, there's licensing, cranes, there's all sorts of licensing for different types of cranes. But yeah, as you get into more complex machine, there's going to be more requirement on licensing and competency requirements on those equipment.
And I'd probably also say that if you are uncertain about the type of plant and machinery and what those requirements are, that you just don't take that risk until...
Yeah, absolutely. So if not certain, don't touch it. And there may be other licensing that you may need as well that's connected to the plant. So if it's a truck-mounted boom, you're obviously going to need your medium ridges driver's license as well. So other items like that.
And what type of equipment would you say would require a pre-start checklist to?
Every equipment, to be honest. So anytime you use any type of machinery, plant or equipment, it's going to require a pre-use checklist. Even if it's something simple, once again, like a power drill, you need to pick it up and ensure that it's not broken or any parts that are not there or any consumable parts that maybe crack or need replacement as well. So you want to pick up the drill, inspect it, make sure it's all intact, maybe look at the power leads to make sure there's no frayed cables or any risk of electrical shock. Look for its test tag, all those bits of items. And that applies to every plant and equipment that you're going to come across. It's not just the equipment itself you want to look at though, Cassie. You also want to have a look at the environment where you're going to use that bit of equipment as well. So if you're going to use that power drill in an area, which is, you're going to need to look at the emissions. How much noise is it going to make? How much dust is it going to create? Who are the third-party users of the site? Is there anyone else doing exactly the same thing, which is going to also impact the risk at your site as well? And so you need to take all those items into account into a pre-use checklist for any plant equipment as well. So for larger equipment, it might be, is the ground stable? Do you have a known load rating of the surface you're going to drive across so it can actually take the weight? You know, are there height restrictions or beams or stuff in the way? So there's lots of stuff that we need to identify in the pre-use checklist as well. So it could be a part of a larger risk assessment as well that you need to undertake.
Yeah, and there was a really good story recently that involved the overhead power line.
Port Macquarie, right? Yeah, that's right. So recently there was that incident at Port Macquarie, and they hadn't been maintaining their truck-mounted EWP boom, and it wasn't being maintained correctly. So some of I believe it was the hydraulic hoses weren't done correctly on the unit, and unfortunately, when the operator was operating that elevator work platform, it didn't operate correctly, and it believed it continued to maneuver when they tried to stop it from maneuvering up into some power lines, which unfortunately killed the operator of that EWP. So, you got to want to make sure your equipment and pre-use checks are done in order to prevent an incident like that, because that operator would be able to see that coming for a few seconds before it actually occurred too. And it's like a horrible nightmarish scenario to get yourself in. So simple checks.
Something that could have been prevented through maintenance as well as that pre-start.
Easily prevented with the right maintenance and pre-use checks and a willingness and a culture to say, no, this is unsafe. I'm going to give this one a miss today until we get the right equipment on site, no matter how much pressure is to get the job done.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. So talking about those larger, machinery logbooks,
yep,
they come into it as well, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. So for your, once again, elevator work platforms, your excavators, your forklifts and equipment like that, it's going to have a logbook mostly situated on the machine that you can actually access. And the logbook is going to have details of what you should be looking at your pre-use checklist. And it's generally got a guide or a checklist in that logbook for the user to fill out. And, you need to use the logbook to say that you're operating that bit of equipment that day to keep a record of it. But the logbook generally goes a little bit further as well. It's generally got additional safety information in regards to the operation of the machine. And it's also got information around when it was last maintained and who's been maintaining it, and what qualifications they got in regards to the maintenance of that bit of equipment as well. So you can see if it's been maintained recently, inspected by a proper, suitably qualified service person to ensure that bit of equipment's operating correctly as well. So you want to use those logbooks every single time.
That would be quite important, especially if you're hiring the machinery as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So if it's hire equipment, they're going to be responsible for servicing the equipment. So that information is going to be in that logbook. But if you're the owner of the equipment, you need to make sure that logbook's up to date, which means a little bit extra work, and you need to make sure it's maintained at its regular intervals. And having a good asset register, once again, that tells you what you're going to do and when to do it with a good digital workflow behind it. It's going to be able to help you guys maintain your plant and equipment that you do own. And it's critical for safety. So if an injury does occur using plant machinery equipment and you don't have a good register with records of when maintenance and inspection checks and stuff like that is on there on a good asset register, it can cause some really big issues, so it's a good liability practice, and it maintains safety for everyone using that equipment.
And part of that would be having a proper notification system as well, so that...
Yeah, And proper notification system, an incident reporting that uploads actions that you can, fix equipment and get things done in certain times. Yep.
And just to surmise that, what would you say would be the overall goal of having the pre-use checks and the logbooks?
Yeah, so the overall goal is just to, make the workplace a safer place to operate machinery, plant and equipment. So both of them combined, the pre-use checklist and the logbook, are going to be working to reducing the hazards and helping you identify those hazards so that it's safer for the operators and third-party users and anyone else that happens to be at the site for those individuals. So it's a really important step that we need to make sure. So I know it seems like a lot of work, and a lot of sites that I go to do site audits, you often find the logbook's not completed, and it's a quick little defect that we can write up, but it's a really important thing that we know, because we've seen the stories. It saves lives. So
now, what are some steps that we can take to minimise some of those risks surrounding machinery, plant and equipment?
Yeah, so some of the steps you want to look at is obviously the condition of the equipment. That's something that you want to look at. You want to look at the risk and hazards associated with them. We want to look at the guarding of if any plant equipment requires guards. Any consumables, so for example, angle grinder disc on grinders, you want to make sure that they're up to date and there are no cracks or anything like that, because they can break apart. So you want to be able to look at some of that stuff. Stored energy is another risk. So you get stored energy in hydraulic hoses, in pneumatics, with electrical circuits and stuff like that, which if they come exposed, they can cause harm to the users. We got hazards such as overhead hazards. So, you might run into overhead hazards if you've got things that can elevate, or overhead power lines, for example. So there's a lot of hazards going on around machinery, plant equipment that we need to be able to identify, and all have different associations with the plant equipment. I mean, when you're traversing in a plant equipment, if it's a vehicle, you got risk of overturning as well. So there's so many things we could go on about in regard to hazards.
Yes. So what could be some steps that we could take to minimise some of those areas?
Yeah, so the first thing you want to do is do the good, thorough risk assessment. And that may be even prior to purchasing the equipment or hiring the equipment, to make sure it's the correct equipment for the job that you're going to be undertaking.
So that could include consultation with the workers?
Yeah, absolutely. Consultation with the workers, consultation with the clients, going to site and having a look at the actual site to see what's going to be suitable and fit for the purpose. So consultation plays a big part. Another thing is, the environment and load ratings of what we can use the equipment on, whether it's suitable or the right equipment to use. We've also got, things that we can do, like the use of spotters. And
that's a great one. Yeah, and I would also say probably just the safety culture of the workplace is really important as well to help minimise those risks surrounding those. So speaking about spotters, how would they be able to contribute to the workplace safety?
Yeah, so spotters are massive contribution to, especially if you're in a vehicle style machine or any type of machine, a spotter is going to be able to provide an additional set of eyes to see the hazards that are occurring that you may not from your perspective. But spotters can sometimes be a legal requirement to have, depending on the bit of equipment that you're using. So for example, elevated work platforms, depending on what state you're in, there may be a legal requirement to have a spotter for elevated work platforms. So check your local jurisdictional requirements for that. But for elevated work platforms, I would just use a spotter anytime anyway. Most of the new codes of practice suggest that it is a requirement anyway. And what their job is to observe the operation of the equipment, not do any other work while they're carrying out that observation task. And they're going to be required to look for the hazards like beams that they might run into, where they're traversing a unit from one area to the other, to make sure there's no load shift, looking for things like acid strike or any items like that.
So really just continuously checking that path, the travel path as well to...
Yeah, absolutely. So any path that the equipment might be traversing across to identify any hazards. If you have an EWP, have a slight extended boom on an EWP and it traverses, any slight movement in the floor level means a large difference in the boom. So that can actually mean the difference between having the boom underneath a roof level to actually striking a roof, if there's a roof above the boom and extended boom.
Good point. Now, are there any specific qualifications that a safety spotter would be required?
Yeah, you would want the safety observer, safety spotter, to have similar qualifications to the operator of the equipment, if not more so than the operator themselves. So if you're spotting an elevated work platform, you'd want an elevated work platform ticket for that specific product or machine. Same with excavators. It's a little bit slightly different for cranes, but still there's specific qualifications to get in regards to that. So
they would probably also need to be quite proficient in communication.
Yeah, absolutely. So you'd want the two spotters to have very clear communication between each other. You probably won't want to rely on phones because it'll take a while to answer the phone. So you want clear communication. If it can't be verbal, direct verbal, introduce some two-way radios or any sort of items like that. Make sure you're obviously in high vis as well. That's probably a handy tip as well, so you can be seen and you're also at a safe distance away and still observing properly.
Given that they would have the same sort of qualifications, it would make it a whole lot easier to identify those hazards. Yeah. And keeping up with that refresher training at the same time. To understand the safety protocols that need to be taken. Yeah. Now, you were talking before about EWPs and the slight angles. What other measures could we take to make sure that machinery plant isn't overturning? Yeah, so there's a couple of different scenarios where machinery plant can overturn. So when machinery plant is like traversing from one area to another, it may be an excavator traveling along a dirt road and it's not level. Even the example is lawnmowers. They quite often ride on lawnmowers, just operate on slopes that are too steep and they tend to roll onto the person as operating them as well, which causes some injury. But with excavators, you just want to watch that, it's a safe area to traverse. Once again, you want to have a look at the road conditions to make sure that the road's not going to give way or, anything underneath the whatever the equipment is that's traversing. But also when you're operating, maybe at EWPs at extended heights, you can get load shift and it can cause an overclaps in windy conditions and stuff like that. So, an observer is going to play a role in that as well, but also those risk assessments and operating in the right conditions. So known load ratings for the ground is going to be important as well. But yeah, definitely. Sometimes there's a need for outriggers and stabilizers as well. So when equipment is stationary, you may need to deploy the outriggers. And then you've got to be careful once again. You're putting those outriggers in places where the ground is stable and is able to support the weight of that bit of equipment as well. So if it's kind of soft or wet soil that you're putting the outriggers on, there may be additional stuff that you need to put there in order to support that bit of equipment as well. Probably, again, checking the maintenance and wear and tear on items like that are there to help stop the overturning. Yeah. Now, we were talking about some of them traversing. So how would machines be able to be moved safely around a work site? So you're going to need exclusion zones and operating zones set up really for the bit of equipment that you're using. Normally for the big principal contractor sites, they'll already have those clearly marked out, and sort of in your induction you get told this is where the machinery or plant equipment can operate or different types can operate. It might have safe crossing and pedestrian zones and all that type of stuff set up as well. If you don't have that luxury on the sites that you're working at, you really need to identify your exclusion zones so that anything falling from the equipment or the equipment maneuvering or potentially striking is going to be reduced by getting it out of the way of that fenced area. And at a basic understanding of that, what could that look like? You were talking about a fence. So it could look like a barricade of any sort of description. So you could use witches hats, so it's probably the lowest form of control. 2 metre high fencing is probably the best that we can use. And it depends on the size of equipment. Like if you're using power tools or hand tools, you're not going to need a huge exclusion zone. But if you're using mobile plant, especially large mobile plant, you're going to need a very large exclusion zone. And you're going to have to make sure that no other third parties are operating in that area so you don't accidentally squash them. Speed would also come into play there then. Yeah, absolutely. So you don't want to be racing around sites that, has lots of collision points or problems on that particular site. Yeah. So, and not to forget our spotters. Spotters will play a huge role. Yeah, so we touched briefly on the exclusion zones. How can we better manage those areas? We can better manage them, once again, just by using fences, communication, clearly signed, pre-start talks, inductions, and label it. You can use orange bunting or something to really address those points. Another concern would be if you're in those exclusion zones, if there's overhead power lines, I'm guessing that you probably will want to do a lot of work in regards to hierarchy controls about how you're going to work around where there's overhead power line risk.
So, for example, one of the top things you could do is see if you could disconnect any overhead power lines and turn the power off so it's completely safe to operate near. If that's not an option to you, you can work down the hierarchy controls by, identifying your approach distances and marking your approach distances with like some bunting or some conduits up in the air so that you can clearly tell how far you can approach or how close you can get to them. And some signs on the ground such as look up and live or power lines above or something like that in regards to that. Yeah.
What precautions can we take to stop falls from machinery?
Yeah, so falls that's a really common hazard on machinery and plant equipment. So, you often have to get up onto the equipment to unload or unload it or just do some maintenance work, check little bits and pieces in the equipment. So it's important if we have to work on top of equipment or where there's a risk of fall around machine and plant and equipment, that we implement working at heights control. So that might be guardrails, handrails, scaffolding, harness and rope systems, or whatever rope safety techniques, whatever those techniques are, we've got to make sure we monitor the risk of falling off that equipment as well. So it's a really important risk. Even if it's just for a short time, you just got to get up there for a quick time. It's not worth it. Just put the controls in place and make sure you got it.
Yeah.
Rule of thumb, if you're above 2 meters, must be for protection.
It's really important to make sure that you're providing that training to your workers as well as
Working at heights training if you're going to be working at heights. Yeah.
Another point to make about that would be the overreaching.
Yes. So once again, if you're on a bit of equipment and you're trying to do something, you're overreaching. Yeah. Once again, you just need that fall protection equipment to be able to prevent those falls. So absolutely.
So you touched briefly before about the safety practices that which we should be following when we're working near overhead power lines. I thought that might be something that we could touch on a little bit more if there was anything else.
More safety practices in regards to overhead power lines. So once again, you just need to identify them in your risk assessment where those operations are going to be. We need to be able to go through that hierarchy controls I mentioned before to see if we can isolate, disconnect, get an ASP contractor in to remove the overhead power lines. You can use tiger tails. Tiger tails is a visual aid. You can also use insulation. Sometimes those options are not suitable because of the time it takes to actually get those items installed. So if you can identify your safe approach distances and maintain operation outside of those approach distances, that'll be the best case scenarios. In some cases, you may need an authorized person to operate the equipment who can operate within those approach distances as well.
Okay, great. Now, when does working with machinery, plant and equipment become high-risk construction work?
Yeah, so it's going to be high-risk construction work whenever there's mobile plant involved, or you use any machinery, plant equipment and it involves a demolition project, working at heights, or can't remember.
Excavation, I believe.
Excavations, that's it. Yeah. Well done. I knew there was one, I just couldn't quite remember. So excavations, working at heights, and demolition work, or if it's mobile plant. So in those conditions, it's considered high-risk construction work.
Okay, great. And when it does turn out to be high-risk construction work, I believe that there's some extra steps that we need to take.
So there absolutely is. So to comply with the work health and safety regulations, the one thing that we're going to need when it's considered high-risk construction work is safe work method statements. So we need to have those safe work method statements in place. We need to ensure that they're done in consultation with the workforce and that they're specific to the site. And they address the risk and hazards and implement the controls inside. Now, safe work method statements will need to be complied with by the workers, and if they can't be complied to, the work must stop. So the good thing is, part of this risk focus program too, Cassie, we've actually updated 5 new SWMS specifically for our NECASafe generator and our NECASafe Empower users. So if you guys are on those systems, you're going to get 5 new updated SWMS specifically relating to machinery, plant and equipment. And so that's a great thing. But, we've got safe work method statements and a whole bunch of other stuff available for our NECA members as well.
And that is a requirement for SWMS to be regularly reviewed and updated as well. So that's a lot of the hard work done already. Yeah,
we do your homework for you, basically.
All right. Well, thank you very much for going through all of that, Owen. It's been quite insightful. So really now it's just over to you guys to check out the member knowledge-based toolkit for this month's risk focus. We have Toolbox Talks as well as safety templates that are available to you. as well as this month's field-based HSEQ inspection template for machinery, plant and equipment. You're able to earn a training record by watching this video and scanning the QR code at the end, so make sure that you instruct your workers to do that.
There's a quiz available as well with that training record. So try to do the quiz and see how you go. And if you need further reading, we've developed 4 unique Toolbox Talks of machinery, plant equipment available on our members' knowledge base as well.
Yes. If you are interested in anything further with NECASafe, please feel free to give us a call, 1300 361 099. We do free advisory visits every year for our members, so we are more than happy to do a complimentary compliance review for you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you, Cassie. Thanks, guys.